Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Couple Synergy Connections Tuesday night webinar with Angela, myself, and Dr. Ray and Jean will join us in one moment. While you're getting into a comfortable position, making sure that your environment is comfortable and free of distractions, go ahead and start defining in your mind what parallel lives mean, especially if someone's in a committed relationship. Because tonight, Dr. Ray and Jean will be talking about the impact of living parallel lives in committed relationships. Hello.
Hey. Hello, Angie, and hello, Couple Synergy.
Good morning.
Good morning. Jean's favorite greeting is good morning, no matter what time of the day it is.
You cannot wear it out.
No. And
it's always fresh in the beginning.
My favorite meal is breakfast. So it kind of works that way for both of us, right? So yes, Angie posed an awesome question, right? And what does parallel lives mean to you? I guess parallel lives was defined originally by Plutarch, right? Talking about the parallel lives between the gods and humans.
As above, so below.
As above, so below, yes. But today in our webinar, we're going to be talking about parallel lives in a very different sense, all right? Parallel lives as it pertains to committed relationships. And just so all of you know, it is a very common thing that happens, parallel lives.
Yeah. And I think in our first relationships, which is parent-child, that tends to be a parallel type of relationship. At least I think it should be for the most part, even though there's a weaving of interaction, adult things and children things are sort of parallel. And so adults facilitate getting their kids active in stuff, but then they don't necessarily participate. And so it is something that we're very used to.
Well, originally the hierarchical, right? Hierarchy happens within a family. First off, a couple comes together and they have this wonderful bond and they start just really connecting with each other and loving each other. And, you know, the excitement and passion is there in the relationship. And then they get married and they start their lives and then they have kids. And now with kids entering into the picture, there forms a hierarchy, parents and children. And that's a very natural hierarchy to develop within a family. But the parallel lives that we are referring to and talking about it is what happens between the couple in the relationship. And it is something that typically starts to happen when, I would say typically when they start to have kids. Would you agree?
I think people without kids can have parallel lives.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But typically it'll start, you know, with kids. For those that don't have kids, I think it probably starts right around the 3, 4, 5 year mark.
Same time.
Right around there.
Ish.
Right.
Yeah. You know, as we're thinking about this topic, I think about, I grew up in a home with 11 people, and it was very parallel. All the lives in the home were very parallel. I mean, not that we didn't do common things sometimes, but for the most part, everyone was sort of doing their thing. They were at different stages of life, and they were, it just was kind of the way it was. And that's one of the things that is amazing to me, that you can be actually in the same room with another person, and that person can be in a different world. And even though you're spending time together, you could be very separate. And I think it's especially for the male brain, right? Like if they're in front of a screen, they don't hear the kids, they don't hear whatever you just said, you know, that kind of stuff. And so when you're the one observing the parallelness or the lack of connection, it can be painful, but the other person doesn't feel any pain. They don't notice, so to speak.
Right.
And I think one of the hardest relationship dynamics that we found to resolve is when two people are living very different lives, in particularly a stay-at-home parent
Mm-hmm.
and a working parent.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that their lives are very different.
Right.
And so because of that, and we think about, you know, railroad tracks and they run parallel to each other, their lives are being spent in the home,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
they live together, they are dealing with the finances and, you know, the delineation of tasks, they're dealing with the kids, but everything is running parallel with each other, meaning that there is no, you know, cross or intersection in their lives, other than maybe kids if they have kids, you know, but that's really coming from a co-parenting perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to their relationship specifically in sharing with each other, that doesn't happen,
Right.
right?
And, you know, my parents had that set up, but I do remember my dad always kissed my mom hello and goodbye.
Mm.
He always called at lunchtime. They always went to bed together as a couple, and they socialized together as a couple. And so even though their work lives, their Monday through Friday lives were on separate planes, they very much had all those touch points that we like to talk about that kept their lives from being parallel. And they absolutely got babysitters for, I think there were 7 of us under the age of 10. I remember my brother was 18 months old, my youngest brother, which would make my oldest brother 10. And we had a babysitter because the 18-month-old would always throw up because he'd eat hot dogs
I could
and
not
not chew.
imagine.
I don't know if we ever had the same babysitter twice.
7 kids, let alone 9. Oh my gosh.
But, you know, it kind of brings me to something that, you know, I think stands out for me in my life and a big thing that happened for us this week, right?
Yeah.
Is, you know, Ray and I started our family as a family, right? When we got married, we already had a 10-year-old son. And shortly thereafter, we had a child together. And we were both sort of you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, you know, all for the common goal of us. And, you know, we get through life and the kids get raised and they leave. And suddenly this dog starts following me around everywhere. Right now, we started hiking then. And so she did a lot of hikes with us, but wherever I went, because we didn't leave her alone anymore, she started coming to work with us. She was a therapy dog. And in particular, she followed me. She became my shadow. And I think that might have been my first real intersecting life where I always thought about her back. Once I noticed she was following me, I had to make sure she was keeping up with me. She was fed. She was, you know, her needs were met. And it helped me learn a certain type of bond that I never really experienced before.
Mm. So for those of you who are tuning in and may not know that, you know, our therapy dog and our last dog that we've had, she passed this past Friday. We had our whole family over and, you know, we were all able to, you know, say goodbye and have a really awesome send off for her. But it's the first time that Jean and I have been, you know, in the house alone without having to tend to something or someone. And so it's like we really feel that loss, right? And, you know, throughout our life, I mean, we don't ever, you know, talk about these topics from a perspective of, you know, telling people what to do, you know, because just, you know, we said so. We talk about these topics because we actually experience them and we go through them ourselves. And, you know, throughout our relationship, there were times where we lived parallel lives. I mean, I would say, thinking my doctorate, just for one, right off the top of my mind, is, there were times where I had to study late at night, and I had to go to class. And there were many times, a lot of hours where we spent apart and we were doing separate things. And that is, that's the epitome of parallel lives. And especially if you're not trying to connect during those times, you're not trying to share your experiences with each other during those times, it can cause even more of a distance.
Right. And, the way we knew it was Jasmine's time to go is she stopped following. She started not sleeping by us, sleeping away from us. When we'd leave the room, she'd stay and sleep. She was ready, and she started to distance herself. And, even I think that's the most shocking part. A couple days later is, every time I've eaten food for years, I always kept a portion for her, and now I don't have to, and I don't trip over anyone when I'm cooking. And, it's those kind of those subtle things. And so when you're living parallel lives, it's so difficult to be aware of it because you're paying attention to your environment and what's happening in there. And then you're not necessarily bringing that back home and sharing that. And so many couples don't know how far they've become distant in that parallelness until one of them finds some pain in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were kind of talking about how do parallel lives get formed and why do they get formed? And I think the opposite is a little bit more difficult, to have intersecting lives and to really think about the other person. And, mine and Ray's life is interesting. We met at work, except for one time, a very brief couple months of our lives, we didn't work in the same building. We didn't always work in the same room, and we still don't, but we always worked in the same building. Right. Even when our kids were little, which lent a lot of that cross time together. And so when we get to parallel lives, it's a very different feeling for us. But I think most people never have that experience. And they're always, even when they're first getting together, they're getting up and going to work, or they're getting up and, right, hanging out with their families or whatever. And
yeah, a lot of couples aren't seeing each other until, when one person comes home for work, right? Because one person has to leave early before the other person wakes up. And so that disconnect or reconnection, I should say, doesn't occur until later on in the day. Or a lot of times the first interaction that they have is maybe a text or a phone call at lunch, right? And so our situation is very atypical in the fact that we were able to actually, see each other every single day at work. And, that does a lot, but still, even though we were able to have that much time together, we still experience parallel lives as well, right? And so this is a very real thing, as we started out talking about. It's a very real thing. It's a very big challenge for a lot of couples. And as Jean alluded to, it's something that happens very incrementally, right? It's something that you don't really notice, like little by little. And, there's a lot of great reasons. There's a lot of great reasons why, you would start to distance yourself, from your partner. You're not intentionally wanting to have that distance. You're not intentionally, wanting to kind of put your arm's length and say, I don't want to talk to my partner right now. It's really because maybe something is happening at work. There's a lot of stress that's going on and you need to put more energy into work. Sorry, honey, I got to work late. My boss is putting a deadline and I'm not going to make it for dinner. Right. And then it happens again. And then it happens again. Right. Or the kids have something going on. And so, sorry, we're just going to have to be two ships in the night. Right. You pick them up here. I'll pick them up there. And so that little by little distance that occurs, and for good reasons, for legitimate reasons, I should say, it starts to erode the relationship, and this parallelness, the gap in between your lives, start to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a problem, It's more a reflection of kind of where you're at in your life until it becomes conscious, until you're consciously thinking, I'm not going to share that with my partner. I don't want my partner to know about this part of my life. I feel a strong connection with my child. They've just done something. If my partner finds out, they're going to be angry or so I'm not going to tell them and withhold. Or we withhold for other reasons. And they're not necessarily, we're doing something wrong. It's just we're trying to not add stress to the other person or we forget, And so there's this analogy that I like to sort of more of a drawing. I'm going to draw it with my hands. So, when we first get in a relationship, one person's moving this way and the other person, is following. And as that person turns, the other person turns. This is what we're talking about, parallel lives, and we do that. But then what happens is we start to do this and we start to go out. And if you're in a bonded, committed relationship, you will feel the greatest distance that you can tolerate. And then this should happen where the couple comes back together and starts that intersecting lives and starts weaving a life together that looks more like that. And so, businesses do this all the time. Businesses say, okay, let's head for this point. We set some goals. We're headed there. And before we ever get to that goal, let's take some time and sit back and evaluate that. Is that working for us? Do we need to adjust something? Are we headed towards that goal? Is that the right goal? Do we move the goal and therefore change direction? And they're very conscious about how often they get together and infuse that type of energy of brainstorming and problem solving and checking in with each other. Is this working for you? Is this not working? What's working? What isn't? What should we change? And I think that's the part that couples don't do. They don't even realize that maybe they should. It sounds so formal to have like a family meeting or a couples meeting.
Right?
Yeah. And, one of the questions we ask couples when we first start working with them is, when is the last time you took a trip together? Just the two of you.
You would not imagine how many couples say before they got married or
before they had kids.
Before they had kids, I should say. Before they had kids.
And their kids are in their
last
teens.
time, right? They had a trip together, just the two of them. And sometimes they look at each other and say, I don't even remember.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's just so sad that they're not investing that energy and time into their relationship. And if you think about your relationship like a bank account and, spending that time together, going on a trip together is deposits in that account, and dealing with everyday stress and dealing with, this parallel lives and all of that is, or having arguments and conflict is a withdrawal. A lot of these couples that we start meeting with, they are already in the red, and they just are depleted.
And probably their most connected time is binge watching a show.
And a lot of them think that that's time that they should be spending together. That's quality time, is sitting, on a couch and watching TV. And it kind of feels like you are. It feels like you're spending time together, but really you're not.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you're sitting next to each other, but you're engaging in something else, something external. And there are very few couples that, maybe you'll pause the show and talk and interact. That's a little bit different. Most couples, they're just going to sit there and just zone out and watch what's on the screen. And that's just day in and day out. If you think about that over time, that's what you're reinforcing in your relationship. You're reinforcing this distance. And how apropos is that? I mean, that's parallel lives, just sitting next to each other, going in the same direction to the TV. Right.
And if you're listening to us, how many of you have that experience? And, it's very uncomfortable to try to turn away from that. It's so seductive. It's so seductive to just veg out in front of the TV and to, if you turn it off, all of a sudden it's pretty quiet. And
There were couples that we've met with where one person is down on the main floor watching their show, and the other person is upstairs in their room watching their show, and so they're not even in the same room watching the same show. I talk about parallel lives. It's experiencing two different things and not intersecting and not sharing with each other what your experience is. And unfortunately, it's very rampant in our society today.
So, we were working out today, and my trainer says, everything you do contributes to being healthier or being less healthy. Everything you do, whether you sleep well or drink something, eat something, move your body, don't move your body, everything is either moving in one direction or it's moving in the other direction. And the exact same thing is true of relationships, that everything we choose is either moving us towards each other or moving us away from each other. And it just is the way it is. And what happens for couples is if they've created enough distance, they've started to grow separately. And so that means that they don't fit so well together. Their views of the world start to shift, and their beliefs and their feelings and their energy level, it all starts to change. And then when they do try to come together, it feels awkward, and they fight, because some of the reasons they're not hanging out together is because they're not sharing certain things, because they don't know how to resolve conflict so much anymore. They don't know how to talk about what's in their heart. Their person's looking at them like, I don't know who you've become. And, only very small part of us changes. We are all underneath still the other person fell in love with, for sure. But we get like a layer over us that we can't acknowledge. We can't see. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And what I love about what you just said was all of our, our partner is the person that we fell in love with, and same vice versa. And that's absolutely true. And that is so heartwarming, because I could see how, what you're describing about watching the same show. And I mean, even that is a little closer than some couples are, right? Mm-hmm. Like being able to sit in the same room and watch the same show together. Some couples are not like that. So it's hopefully a wonderful reminder for those couples who have certain struggles and they live independent. They're sort of like single. They live in the same house. Mm-hmm. Would you call them roommates? Like they get to that point.
Yeah.
So maybe they need that reminder.
Yeah, we're not saying that sitting on a couch watching a show is a bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. And what we're saying here is that parallel lives over time can degrade the relationship and can become and feel more like roommates, kind of what you said, right, Ange? And it starts to erode the other parts of a relationship, the passion, the excitement, right? That giddy feeling that every couple remembers feeling, about their partner. And just because you've been with your partner for 25, 30, 40, 50 years, there's no reason why you can't feel that, right? In fact, there were PET scans that were done with couples who have been together over a long-term period. And they found couples who have been together over 50 years, right? 25 years. They have the same area in the brain light up that couples who just met and are in that lust infatuation stage have. And it's the same area of the brain because they have developed this thing called real love. And it is something that occurs over a long period of time, going through these developmental stages in a relationship and still continuing to connect. Not living parallel lives or living like roommates, but connecting and really learning what they're supposed to learn over time in the relationship.
I was just thinking about, like, if you uncover a family treasure that's been in a crawl space somewhere up in the attic, or it's very old, and the oldness of it has a wonderful energy to it. And I recently had that experience because I found my parents' wedding picture from 1961, and it's literally like down the aisle, the whole, cathedral church, and way in there, kneeling down, are my parents getting married, and my grandparents' wedding photo from 1937. And I took these photos and I printed them out, because who prints out anymore, right? And
Walgreens, apparently.
And I went to the Goodwill and found some old frames and framed them and put them on the wall. And the fact that they're that old holds a vibration that's so beautiful that you can't really get with a couple that just got married. And there's a beauty in the couple who just got married as well, but there's a beauty in this other thing. And so if you've ever found a piece of furniture or something else, and when you find it, it looks like garbage, it's covered with dust, and maybe it's worn out, and then you restore it, and the restoration of it isn't just like, oh, it's brand new again. It's not. It is something that's held many, many years of memory, and it's beautiful again. And you can't have that when you're married 1 or 2 or 3 years. You have to be married 20, 25 years to have that.
Mm. I like that. That means that, if you're living parallel lives out there,
You're getting dusty.
you're getting you're getting dusty, and you can clean off the dust, and you can restore it, and you can restore it to its beautiful, beautiful looking, piece, right?
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
If we're going to still go with that analogy.
Here we go.
Sometimes you have to sand off the old varnish, you got to sand it away, and you got to get back down to the natural wood. And I can tell you this, that's painful. And that's a lot of times what we're doing when we're working directly with a couple.
Mhm.
They see the value in this thing they have,
Right.
but they also see all the wear and tear and all of the chipped paint and the they can't just clean it off. They got to rehab,
That's why my nickname is a Sandman.
and it takes energy and time and effort to do that. But it's so worth it. It is so worth it. And when we're working really long term with couples that have been together quite a bit, there really is that piece that they're uncovering that the other person's never really seen. They never got to that raw, natural depth, because we don't know how to do that naturally. We don't know how to naturally and continuously dive into a relationship and work on it at that level. And so we get the chips and the bruises and the worn off parts, and we forget the beauty that is underneath it. And this is not something that you can really change doing an hour a week worth of work with us. This is the real work, where you're going to sit and you're going to have those late night chats again, and those intense conversations about where are we going and who are we and who are you, and I want you to know me again.
And can you describe what you mean by we get the chips and the bruises? What are some examples of that a couple or a partner would get?
We can't help but hurt each other.
Right.
And sometimes that hurt is, inadvertent. And sometimes it is because, and I would say it's mostly because we have needs, right? And these needs are not just food, clothing, shelter. These are needs for attention and validation and acceptance and connection. And every time you reach out and you say to your partner, hey, here's this thing I'm doing, and you hear, and so you go, oh, never mind. That's a chip. That's a bruise. That is in that pile that says ouch.
And I was thinking, would another example be every time you say, "Hey, partner, would you like to go do this with me?" and you hear crickets.
Or
I'm
no.
sure that's the same, or no, right?
Right.
Actually, no probably comes up more often than just crickets, right? Then it's like, oh, like that for me would be more of a rejection.
Mhm.
You don't want to do this with me.
Right.
So we podcasted some dance instructors a while back.
Yeah.
Remember that? And, they talked about that concept of learning to dance as a couple. And you are inevitably, you're going to step on your partner's toes, or you're going to move into them and they're going to move into you, or you're going to move away and they're going to move, and you're going to be disjointed in that way. And you think about moving through life as a couple in a relationship, and there are going to be those times, those bumps and bruises that occur. And the intention underneath it is not malicious. You're not looking to hurt your partner, right? Because if we're talking about people who are looking to hurt their partner, they shouldn't be tuning into this. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about people who really love each other, but inadvertently they are making steps, they're saying things, they're taking actions that are causing pain in their partner. And it's inevitable, it's going to happen, but most couples aren't really taught on how to deal with that, how to heal from it, right? And so what happens is these bumps and bruises, they just collect along the way. And they just pile up and pile up. And naturally what happens is that, I don't want to hurt my partner. So I'm going to take a step back. I am not going to engage in this topic because this topic is a really hot button for her or him. And so I'm just going to avoid it, right? And I'm just going to put a little fence around it.
Yeah, let's dance 4 feet apart.
There we go, right.
Then I'm not going to step on your toes.
So line dance, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
But you just kind of start creating these little fences around these hot button areas, and eventually you don't even go into the field because there's too many fences and you can't really navigate through that. So that distance, as we said, it's happening incrementally over time. And also I have to add in there is that as this distance is growing, and as you start to treat your partner with kid gloves, because you don't want to hurt them, you don't want to piss them off, you don't want to start a conflict, or you don't want to be in trouble, okay? What happens is that in that distance, resentment grows. And in that distance, you start to fill in the gaps about who your partner is and who they aren't. And you start to create them into a monster.
That's the dust.
That's the dust, sanding off the dust. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So, it is a very common thing that happens. If you're not connecting, you're assuming. Oh, I got to put that down. Hashtag.
Can you write that down, Ange? That's a good one.
That's a good one.
If you're not connecting.
You're not connecting, you're assuming.
Yeah.
Woo! I like it.
And you can't. Assumptions are very, very deadly to things because you start creating an alternative reality, which is part of parallel lives.
Yeah.
And then it becomes 2 people living 2 lives instead of 2 people living the same life.
And unfortunately, a lot of times, we encounter couples who are they love each other. They have so much care and compassion for the partner, and that they couldn't see themselves living without them. But there's so much of this yuck in between that they have no idea how to get back together again, and they don't know how to get through that. And it just hurts too much. I think, I don't know why, I just thought about the Beauty and the Beast, and the castle was surrounded by thorns. And to get to that castle, you had to bust through all those thorns. And, that's really kind of a good visual as to what occurs in between the couple. And so they just continue on doing what they're doing, because that at least is not as painful as heading into the thorns, into the thicket, and really trying to get to their partner.
But really, what is more beautiful than watching two people really dance together?
Oh, that's great. It's awesome when they're really connected.
Mm-hmm.
They're not fighting on the dance floor.
Mm-hmm. And even if they mess up, they just laugh, and it's, that's a really enjoyable thing to watch, regardless of their skill level, I would say.
Yeah.
And so, it's tricky. And the other thing that happens, if you think about, restoring a dresser or something like that, a piece of furniture, now we're talking about something alive and living as a person, that we are growing outside of that container. We're growing beyond the chipped wood and the dust, and sometimes the growth happens, and new growth is very tender. It's very vulnerable. It's very tender, and a little growth pops out, and that feeling starts again of, oh, I have this heaviness on me. I have all the mud and the stuff from the wounds of my life. Kind of like that one meditation we did with the gold Buddha, and it had the cracks on it.
Oh, yeah.
They put mud all over it to disguise it, right? And then it fell away. And there's just that goodness underneath that. I think when life does that to us, when life continues to demand our time with our kids and with logistics and work and everything else that goes into life, when we forget about our relationship, we forget about it. We take it for granted that other person is just going to be there, but they're growing too, and they're growing away.
So one thing that could be applied to what you two are saying, and that we've had questions about, are concerning age. So you've already done plenty of webinars where you talk about very specific topics. You talked about healthy sexual development as a relationship grows, right? And as people get older, and you've talked about doing new things and having certain goals independently and as a couple. And you talked about the walk, about trying new things together and pushing through certain obstacles. How does just age independently and as a couple impact this whole ability to restore as a couple? What kind of challenges have you seen couples face with age, which could impact our physical appearance, right? And then maybe the boundaries we hold for ourselves. Where do we go on a date? Who do we hang out with? How much younger or older are my friends? Things like that.
Those are multiple questions.
Yes, so that you have a lot to choose from.
Oh,
and
my
I'm
gosh.
assuming you'll choose the most important.
I'm gonna use you as an example, Ange, if that's
Okay.
helpful.
Yes.
So there was this one day very early on in your and Alex's relationship, although you'd already been together at least 5 years, if not a little bit more, and you each packed up a suitcase and you got on a plane and you moved away. And, you had an Airbnb for a couple of days so you could figure out where you're going to live, and you had enough money for your first month's rent, and then you had some time to figure out your jobs and to how to sustain your life in this new place, right? And you had this air mattress. I think that might have been your only piece of furniture, and it had a hole in it. And you would call us and you'd be like, oh, we're not sleeping so well. This air mattress, it has a hole in it. And you would say, Alec is a little bigger than me, so I wait till he bottoms out, and I'm still popped up a little bit, which is good for you. And then he gets up and he blows up the air mattress and he puts some duct tape on it. And I think even bubble gum was in there somewhere. Like whatever you could, you just get this air mattress, which was like your only source of comfort, right? You had your clothes, you had your air mattress. That's about it, and 4 walls. And we would just laugh. We would just laugh so hard after you'd call us because we could have helped. But we knew this was the best part of this stage of your guys' life together. And if we would have helped, we would have taken something away from that. The thing that says, we did it. We made it. We started with these humble beginnings and we figured it out. And do you remember when you bought your first bed? because you didn't have to use that damn air mattress anymore. It was
Yeah. And
so
I mean, even if
wonderful.
everyone reacts differently to things, even if you had offered to help with certain things like, oh, we'll buy you a bed today, I wouldn't have felt comfortable, right?
Yeah,
Alec would have felt differently. So everyone reacts differently. I wouldn't have wanted you to help because I didn't, deserve it. I wasn't at the point where I had enough money to get a bed. So why get one now?
right. And I think that's the point. That's the point is we can't go and rescue each other from those important growth periods. And wherever we are in our relationship and whatever age or stage that we're at has that. And the ones that happen in the first 5 years are different than the ones, in the 7th year or the 10th year or the 20th year. And I would say the longer, the bigger, because we're talking about an air mattress versus a bed, right? Versus kids leaving and life changing. And, like you have this many more years and many more experiences and many more things you've created. And there's always, 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 because you've heard us say this before, even the very first connections we did on happiness, we're not designed to be happy. We're not designed to be content. We're designed to grow. And so no matter where we are, we're always like, what's next?
And with growth comes
What's
pain.
next? And with
right?
growth.
With growth, you can expect pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, we are supposed to struggle. We're supposed to, because what's on the other end of struggling is that feeling of satisfaction, that feeling of being able to accomplish something that maybe at some point you doubted you were able to accomplish. And so, when you bring up that question of age, it's very different because, we could talk about different, generations, with Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, and all the different challenges that each generation is going through because of, what was passed on from the last generation. But really, when it comes down to it, there isn't anything that's a blanket thing that we can say. Each couple has their own specific challenge, and each couple comes together, and it's beautiful. The way it's just amazing how it works is that each person has their own challenges, and they find a partner that has complementary challenges. Not the same challenges, complementary. And so when you come together, that is what your goal is to create something together, is to create the us, right? Synergy. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that is what, couples are designed to do. And your strengths complement your spouse's strengths, and the weaknesses, they also interfere with your partner's weaknesses as well. And you are both, tasked with trying to figure that out together and trying to reach something greater than what you could, which was ever like demonstrated for you.
If you think about, a 3-year-old child who falls down, it's so easy to solve that problem. You pick them up, you dust them off, you give them a little hug, and they try again. But, when they're 15 and they go through their first heartbreak, it's so much harder to help them through that. Or if they go through a job loss or some of the big losses we have in life. So those things change over time. And I think, we change over time. If a 3-year-old fell down and I fell down, we probably would feel very differently tomorrow. I would probably still be like, oh, I fell down, it still hurts. Where they would feel like, what? I don't even remember the 75 times I fell down yesterday. So
they bounce when they hit,
they're closer to the ground.
Right, they are closer to the ground.
So there's different stages, there's different levels of development. That's that growth piece that I was talking about. Like, you have some awareness that you just weren't aware of when you were 20. You just don't, it's just, It's just, and you can't, and it's because you're not there and that you're not supposed to be there. And when we're working with a very young couple that's been together a very short period of time, it is like picking up a little kid, dusting him off, and give them a hug and send them on their way. They heal so quick, right? And then, they'll come back, in 20 years going, that hurts much more now. And that's the thing, when you're really deep into it, the potential for healing it and growth and that restoration and beauty is there's a badge that goes with that. And I feel sad in our culture that we sort of emulate youth and physical beauty, and we forget about this other type of beauty that comes with age and comes with marination. When you make chicken soup, the reason it's good for you is because it's been infused for hours and hours. Unlike the soup I made, which is just some broth and a little turkey I cut up. That's all. It doesn't have any infusion.
So a long-term relationship has been marinating over a long period of time.
Which brings out a lot of flavors.
Yes.
Some good?
It does. Some good and some bad.
No, that's
good. Well, we've been talking about parallel lives and how, it happens little by little over time. And as that time goes on, that distance goes greater. And because of it, resentment grows. And now you become more like strangers and more like roommates. And it takes kind of making those steps, towards your partner, saying, hey, I don't really like the way things are going. I don't like the way that, we separate at night, or I don't like you going to sleep before me and we're not really connecting. And making those small incremental changes to come back together, right? Instead of going apart. And, we always have these choices. And each moment when it comes to our relationships, we have this choice to move closer to our partner or to move further away. And each choice that we make, we have power and control over changing. We don't have any power and control over changing our past or any of the things that we have done to slight our partner. We can take responsibility for it. We can apologize for it. And then we can learn from it. And now we have the moment in front of us. And if we take that moment and we choose to move further away, then we add to that pile of resentment and pain, and hurt. Or we can take that choice, that next step, to move closer to our partner. And maybe we might get rejected, right? Maybe our partner's not ready for it, or they feel a little taken aback because it's a surprise now. But we at least made that step. And if each person is making that step moment by moment, then they become closer and closer and closer together. And that is really, how you can get back to health in our bodies, individually, and also in a relationship.
So maybe we should meditate.
I think it's a good...
I really wanted you to change the camera, just be on you for a minute.
Oh.
Like
this?
Yep, so I could do this.
You wanted to do monster face? Oh. Fun with camera angles.
Because who knew? Who knew? So, Angie, is this a good time for us to meditate?
Yes, it is.
Awesome.
So, one thing I want to tell everybody who's joining us is next week will be our first week with a guest. So you'll have to tune in to find out who it is.
Lovely.
And please ask your questions. The reason why we do these live is to have interaction, to have your comments, and to answer your questions. So that's really helpful if you, join us on YouTube or on our Facebook, to just join in, because it makes the conversation richer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a question out there, it's probably someone else that's got the same question, right? And as we've talked about these topics we've been dealing with for 20 years or so, and we've been helping couples navigate a lot of these issues, so
As we navigate them ourselves.
as we also navigate them ourselves.
And the last thing I'll say is, even if you think you have a silly question or a dumb question, I promise you it's not. And even if you're nervous about asking it, once you do ask it and Dr. Ray and Sheen answer it live on the air, you know what? They're going to make you look like a genius for that question.
Yes, absolutely. I like that, Ange. All right. Are we
Okay.
ready to meditate? Yes. Everybody out there, ready to meditate.
And just bring your awareness to your breath and allow your eyes to go where they'd like. Whether you'd like to look down at the floor, look up at the ceiling. If you're outside, it's beautiful outside in Chicago. Look up at the sky. Or you can close your eyes, whatever feels comfortable. And I want you to imagine that you're walking on a path. And you've been walking a long time on this path. And as you walk, you're carrying a backpack. And along the way on this path, you've picked up rocks along the way. And some of them were so beautiful and so interesting, you put them in your backpack. And some of them were in your way, and you put those in your backpack too. And just for a moment, I want you to look toward the past and see as far back on the path as you can. And how far you've come on the path of life. And as you're facing the past, you feel the weight of the rocks in your backpack. And you remember in the beginning of your journey when it was empty and light. And just for a moment, you take the pack off and you open it up and you look into it. And you feel a strong emotional connection to each and every rock in your pack. The rocks you loved along the way and wanted to take with you, that you've carried through life. And the ones that hurt, they were obstacles, they were painful. And you kept them with you to remind you of what to avoid in the future. And there may be a few in there that you're ready to pull out and leave on the side of the path. And it is 100% your choice what you choose to carry with you on the next step of your journey, or what you choose to leave behind. And when you've adjusted all of the rocks in your pack, the ones you're taking out, the ones you're leaving in, put your pack back on. Be aware of the weight of your pack. Is it heavier? Is it lighter? Is it the same? And as you stand up, you turn towards the future. And you realize as you were standing there that a thick fog had rolled in and covered up the path. And as you look behind you, you can clearly see where you've been. And whether it was painful or happy or lonely or full of joy, you know exactly what that was, and that you went through it, and that you survived. And as you turn around and look into the fog, you feel uncertainty, the unknown, the exciting potential, and incredible fear. And very slowly, when you're ready, take one step into the fog. And as it begins to envelop you, you look toward the past, and you can still see the past, just not as clearly. And as you look to the future, you can see nothing. Imagine holding your hand out, and you can't even see your hand. And allow yourself to take another tentative step as you bring your pack with you. And you allow yourself to be fully engulfed in the fog. Feel the moisture on your skin. And as open as your eyes are, you only see the same whiteness, the dull gray. You try to make out shadows to the left and to the right. And even when you look behind you, it looks exactly the same as the path in front of you. And stand there on the path, in the unknown, in the fog, feeling the weight of your pack, feel the uncertainty, and you have a choice. You can turn toward the past. You can back out of the fog and back into the clarity of what you know. Or you can step into the unknown. You may even choose to put your pack down or to lighten the load. In this moment is the field of potential. And I want you to imagine that as you're standing there, trying to decide what to do, you feel someone take your hand. It's your trusted partner. How does that impact the way you feel in this place of uncertainty and unknown? Does it change your decision to move backwards into a place of the known? Or does it give you courage to take another step deeper into the fog? And if you choose, step back, pulling your partner with you. And imagine the conversation you'll have when you can clearly see their face as you stand there on the path. With your packs behind you, holding your secrets and carrying your pain. And now imagine if you choose to move further into the fog and see it through, letting go of rocks along the way, both the ones that are painful and the ones that are beautiful but belong to the past. And imagine what it feels like to come out on the other side. Stepping into the unknown future with your partner. Consciously letting go along the way. And as you step into the light, into the sunshine and the most vibrant colors, and you take a moment to hold your partner, heart to heart, knowing you came through this together, knowing that whatever life brings, you will get through it together and find yourself in the full light of day. And you take a moment to say a prayer of thankfulness for the courage it takes to continue moving forward on this journey, and the thankfulness of having a partner to share with you in their imperfections and their loyalty staying by your side. And be aware of how light your pack is or how heavy your pack is. And when you're ready, just become aware of the room around you. The space that you're in. And a gratitude for the life that you live. And if you're sitting with your partner right now, grab their hand and look into their eye and smile. And be grateful that your person is there. And if you're on this journey alone right now, be grateful for your courage to continue to move forward, to grow and become.
Thank you so much for joining us today on our weekly webinar as part of our Connections. And we hope to see you next time and next week
With our guest.
with our guests.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time, synergize your life and synergize your love.